Welcome back to the Herbalist Hour. Today I'm excited to have on Heather Luna. Welcome to the show, Heather.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. Nice to be here.
Welcome to the Herbalist Hour. This is where community gather, merging the power of people and the flowers, the sweet and the bitter to the salty, the sour. Umami, it's time for the Herbalist Hour.
Well, let's get to know Heather a little bit more. What were you like as a kiddo?
Uh, Wild and crazy.
Weren't we all?
Pretty much. I think I met all the herbalist criteria from a young
That's right.
age. I really loved plants from the beginning. My parents were martial artists. My mom was a gardener. My grandmother was a gardener. But I grew up in this idea of like health as a way of life, not
Mhm.
just plants. They put me in a gi when I was 3 years old, running around the dojo and karate room.
Wow.
So I have a background in just growing up around an alternative lifestyle and alternative communities. I grew up in Venice Beach, California, and then later moved to Berkeley, California. So real sort of hotbeds for community activism, getting to see all the weird people of the world. So I think that really did frame my adult life and how I can see things through a lens. And of course, I'm a radical myself, so I can't break that mold. It's born and bred into me. Yeah.
Cool. Are you still were you raised in Nevada City, California?
I moved to my mom moved here when I was a teenager.
Okay.
So, I mean, I was in the Bay Area, Berkeley, San Francisco, until about age 17. And then we moved up here. So I did go to my senior year of high school here in Nevada City at a little farm school called the John Woolman School, which really I loved that so much because my classes were like held in barns and I was out building greenhouses and doing orchard management. So being of the earth and involved in land and healing was definitely a part of my upbringing. And then I left, graduated high school. Sadly, I never wanted to leave. That place was so cool.
Uh-huh.
And I went to college and I kept thinking, where's the plant classes? Like I want to learn about herbs.
Yeah.
But I realized they didn't have classes about that in college. You could like study botany or you could
Right.
study horticulture, and that was kind of like, eh, eh.
Yeah. Do you practice martial arts these days at all?
I don't, but
No.
I think it frames the context of sort of being engaged, being active,
Hmm.
doing meditation as a part of life and healing and being involved in movement. So I think that's one of the elements of health and wellness that really does apply to my practice today.
For sure.
Yeah,
So,
I had. Yeah.
well, yeah, I was going to say, what led you into studying the plants then? Not in the university environment, but like, what were some of your
Right.
first schools and first mentors?
I would say the plants themselves
Yeah,
first.
amen. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember one moment in my early childhood. It was about 5 years old, and I was actually visiting in Los Angeles at the time, and I was walking with my dad down the steps of this sort of apartment complex in LA. There's very often there'll be atriums, like planter beds in the middle of a building, and then the units around that
Mm.
central area. And there's some cement steps going down. And I'm being a 5-year-old kid and I'm skipping along, da 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 da, and going down the steps and I tumble and fall and I scrape my knee.
Mm.
And my dad, and in the planter bed next to me was an aloe vera plant. And my dad reached over and broke off a leaf of the aloe vera plant and dabbed it on my owie. That was a critical moment in
Wow.
my life. The light bulb went off. I went, you can do
That's so
that?
cool.
I want to do that. It was like the moment I knew plants were the path for me. So yeah, I think that was an aha moment. And I've kind of been following, ever since childhood, snooping around. Oh, plants, they can be healing too. And started reading my first herb books in my teens. And then, yeah, I mentioned I went to college and they didn't have any herb classes, and I was very disappointed.
Right.
So I actually dropped out of college and sought out herb schools. And the very first herb school I went to attend was the California School of Herbal Studies. It didn't work out for me there for a number of reasons. I had a weird
Hmm.
roommate situation and whatnot, and I decided that was quite right for me to stay
Sure.
there.
Yeah.
And I ended up moving to Colorado. And at the time, it was the Rocky Mountain Center for Botanical Studies. So that was my first formal training after, again, I'd done lots of herb walks and snooping around on my own, but it wasn't quite right till I landed in Boulder, Colorado. At that time, Rocky Mountain Center for Botanical Studies was led by Feather Jones. She was a student of Michael Moore. So she was one of my teachers. That's also where I met Paul Bergner. He was advanced faculty there. And I got to study with some amazing teachers there. I really got a well-rounded education. We did have, like Tim Blakely and Matthew Wood and Matthew Becker and Ryan Drum. David Hoffman came and taught some classes. I even got to sit in a few classes with Michael Moore himself.
Oh, wow.
So I felt like that was a really nice background to start from. And that's also where I met Ann Drucker, who was this sort of wild shamanic healer, herbalist. And she introduced me to a Mayan indigenous healer, Miss Beatrice Waite, who I also went on. I did some private apprenticeships with her. So there was a number of key teachers that came to me through that school. And then it was right around the time that I was graduating from the clinic program there. I did my clinic training with Paul at RMCBS. Okay. Paul Bergner was faculty for that program. But then the Rocky Mountain Center for Botanical Studies closed. And I got to witness the transition from the closure of that school to the birth of the North American Institute of Medical Herbalism, which was founded and run by Paul Bergner. And so once I finished my 3 years of clinical training at Rocky Mountain Center, I then went to NAIMH and I was doing a private apprenticeship with Paul, along with a couple other private apprenticeships because I couldn't stop myself. And so I helped him at the very beginning when he was setting up that school. And then I went through and did his nutrition certificate program at that school in its very beginning years.
Wow. Okay.
Kind of a wild background, but yeah.
That's so cool. I do want to kind of go more into your whole schooling situation, but the whole aloe vera situation with your dad, were there other moments like that where you had a interaction with a plant that kind of like kept feeding you and feeding your love of herbs?
Absolutely. I mean, it's hard to pinpoint them because there are so many moments like that particular one, sitting in a garden and realizing, oh my gosh, I'm bleeding and there's yarrow, like right there when I needed it. Yeah. That sort of example. I think it was when in my teens in particular, I did like my first herb walk. Right? Someone introduced me to violet leaves and I just fell in love. I remember just sitting there in wonder, staring at the violet leaves and eating as many of them as I possibly could, going, this is where it's, this is life. I felt like the calling inside of me was awakened in that particular moment as well. Yeah, I would say it's happened with almost every plant I've fallen in love with over the years. It's happened with nettles and with hawthorn and a lot of the boring basic herbs that are just around me every day.
Oh yeah, I'm sure we can all relate to that. Any current plants that you're really vibing with lately?
Oh gosh, usually it's the things that are blooming that are vibing with me right now.
Yeah, totally.
It's whatever's in season, right now we have the rose hips are just starting to go off because it's still early in the fall season here. I'm seeing the chestnuts coming in and I'm looking at them going, I can't wait till you're ripe. I think it's almost time. Yeah. And of course the acorns. I live in an oak and pine forest, and we have the California black oaks are all around us. So I have been out gathering my acorns this season, and just so much potential and medicine in there. I always am impressed by how much food is just laying around at our feet, and people are like sweeping it off their porch like it's trash. I'm like, this is free and really good, nutritious, abundant food. We should be reclaiming our traditions and our ancestral lineages in relationship with those plants.
Yeah, we've got this little course on our website called The Art of Frugal Nutrition. We haven't done anything with acorns yet, but that's a great idea because you're right. It's nutrient dense and it's free in a lot of areas of the United States.
And it's wildly abundant.
Yeah.
Again, one of the issues with foraging wild foods is that sometimes they're not very abundant and you're worried about, over harvesting. There's no such thing as over harvesting acorns.
Right.
And there's so much of them.
Yeah. They just keep coming and coming. Just a quick break from the show to thank our presenting sponsor, Oshala Farm. Oshala Farm is a beautiful and vibrant certified organic herb farm based in Southern Oregon, where they grow and sell over 80 different plant species.
The founders, Elise and Jeff Higley, have been longtime friends, so I highly trust their growing methods and ethics. You'll love the potency and vibrancy of all the herbs they have to offer. To learn more and purchase their herbs and other organic goods, head to oshalafarm.com. So thanks once again to Oshala Farm for sponsoring the Herbalist Hour. Now back to the show. Enjoy.
Going back to your schooling, I'm just kind of curious. It sounds like you took 3 years at the Rocky Mountain School, and then you helped, or you were participating in Paul's school, NAIMH, if I got that right. And then it just sounds like you kept taking more and more classes, which is great. But I'm curious for the herb student out there listening. When did you decide it was time to, we never stop studying herbs, but when was it time to become a practicing herbalist and really go full bore with that?
Yeah, well, I did start practicing pretty much right out of school. I actually even started teaching right out of school. Once I finished my clinic year at RMCBS, that first year before they closed, they hired me as faculty to teach in their program. So I was teaching right away. I was seeing clients right away. But that developed over many years. And even while I was practicing clinically, I was continuing to do my studies and with Ann Drucker and this Mayan indigenous healer, Miss Beatrice Wade. I actually went to Belize and studied with her and really love that method where they're invoking not just physical clinical skills, but what enlivens the spirit, what nurtures your calling, getting rest and touch and sun and herbs and water on your skin. There's something very tactile about those methods that I think are important for connecting us with nature. I think that's ultimately what healing is about. It's not just about what herbs we take. It's about being connected to nature.
Sounds kind of vitalist.
It's 100% vitalist. That kind of gets me back to the roots of nature here, which is where we're heading. But so I did start practicing right away, but it wasn't like a full-time busy practice. I was seeing maybe a couple clients a month at the most in the beginning years of my practice. I also had a small child at the time. My daughter was, just born right as I was finishing school. So I was getting to practice my skills a lot on raising an infant. And then I think, so what really developed my practice was getting chronic illness. I am not going to lie. That was the biggest game changer of my career. I'd studied all sorts of chronic illness in school, and it was like 10 years after practice, I got Lyme disease.
Wow.
I'm not going to lie. I was bedridden. I was in pain. I thought this was no way to live. It was some of the hardest years of my life. And knowing and having studied Lyme disease and studied chronic illness, I thought I was doing everything right as far as treatment. I'm following what the book says. And at some point I just had to surrender. I just went out into my garden and laid there in the yard and screamed out to the creator, guide me, help me. I can't live like this. With Lyme disease, it's very debilitating. It's not just the physical joint pain. There's depression and the emotional pain that comes with loss of ability because you can't function like you used to in the world. I had moments where I was, not able to get out of bed to take care of my daughter when she needed things. And I felt like a failure as a parent. So there was a lot going on, and I'm not the only one that's a story like that, but was going through that. And that in that process, when I sort of surrendered and asking for guidance from the divine, like, help me, that I started to get some real insights about what it takes to treat chronic illness. And I started applying them. And so I sort of threw away a lot of herbs for Lyme. I'm like, no. And antibiotics, no. And I thought those were the things I was taught, right? Yeah. So I'm throwing away all the things that were known as clinical treatments for chronic illness, of Lyme disease in particular. And I started doing Vitalist therapeutics, 100% dedicated to just that. And it was through that journey. I was about 2 years of chronic illness. And in that journey, I started doing, I completely recovered, by the way. I no longer have any symptoms of Lyme. And I would consider myself Lyme-free, but there's Lyme testing is so inaccurate, I couldn't confirm it with lab work. So there's that. It's like I go by symptom presentation. I feel good. I have energy. But the things that I used for treatment during that time were all the things like sleuthing through your diet, eating only a whole foods diet, prepare all your own food from scratch. Don't trust things that come in a box from somewhere else. Right. So I really dialed in on making sure all my foods were homemade, good nutritionist ingredients. I sleuthed out any particular food intolerance. Leaky gut is one of the prime factors for contributing factors for almost all modern chronic illnesses, but it also applies to Lyme disease and mold illness. So I started doing some gut healing herbs, and removing food intolerances. I'd always known I had like a dairy intolerance, and I'd always kind of avoided that. But I was like, no, there's something else. Let's really check each and every food. Let's really get into what is my body responding to, because a lot of the symptoms of Lyme disease are just inflammation. You're just inflamed. It's just everything's over inflamed. So I'm checking for food inflammations, right? So that's one of my strategies. So I slew through my diet. I also started, even though I was completely exhausted and fatigued beyond a level of explanation,
Wow.
I made myself get out and walk every day. I was like, even if I just kind of like slowly walk down my dirt road, outside my house, and I would stop and touch the plants. I remember the manzanita, that we have giant manzanita where I live that's taller than me. And I would stop and just hold on to the manzanita, stroke its beautiful red bark, take one leaf and chew on it and nibble on the very astringent, bitter manzanita leaves, just to help me get through my walk. Because I knew that getting out in the sunlight and moving my body was one of those important critical factors for moving lymph and immunity and regulating inflammation. It's also mood boosting with the serotonin that comes with sunlight exposure. So the food thing, the getting out and making myself walk thing, I'm getting guidance, I'm asking for guidance. And so I started doing saunas, sweat therapy, just because it came to me as like, that's a really good thing to do. Really targeting sleep as one of my elements. And I started doing things like alternating hot and cold showers, the hydrotherapy treatment for regulating pain. Game changer. Hot and cold alternating showers. That was like, okay, I've got the rest of the day pain free. We can do something. And there was one other sort of magic bullet that helped me recover completely from Lyme. And I will share what that is with you in just a moment. But I'll say before I do that my recovery of Lyme was so astounding, and people in my community were so amazed by what I was doing to recover that they started all calling me with their Lyme questions. And I had a whole string of chronic Lyme disease cases that became the most critical teachers for my practice. So trying it on myself, knowing that it worked, and then being able to try it on others and go, wow, I'm seeing dozens of cases of like, they no longer have chronic Lyme, and they were debilitated for 10 to 20 years, depending on the case. So what were the factors that made that happen? So it was a lot of what I was just talking about with some more nuance. But the last thing that really transformed my condition, and I don't think it's appropriate for everyone, which is why I'm saving it for the end, was bee venom therapy.
Oh, bee vitamin therapy?
Bee venom.
Oh, bee venom.
Live bee stings in my skin.
How did you come across that as a therapy?
It was one of those guidance things. I was asking for guidance, and something about bee venom. And then when I get a question, of course, I don't just follow my intuition without doing some homework. So I started researching bee venom, and I'm like, wow, this is like powerful in ancient Chinese medicine. And they have bee venom clinics all over the world, and they're using it for chronic diseases like fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue. I'm like, those are kind of like my symptoms. Yeah. Sounds right. They're using it for joint pain and arthritis. It's a traditional medicine in many parts of the world. So I did find a local apitherapist, and she trained me and started working on me, and I started using it on myself once I understood the process. But that was, I will say, the bee venom therapy by itself would not have been effective. But because I was doing the overall Vitalist practices of really optimizing nutrition, getting out in nature every day, making sure I was moving, but as well resting, doing things like hot and cold therapy with the saunas and the alternating showers, all of that built. And then adding the bee venom to it was like that final magic little nudge. It gave me a spark where I was like, oh, now I can get out of bed. It gave me a little energy. And I could get out of bed. I was pain free and I could start moving. I could actually start tending my garden and doing things that I was debilitated and couldn't do. I could take care of my daughter. And it gave me enough juice that I could then start doing more for my self-care. So anyway, I think it was a key element for my recovery. And then I did employ it in several of my Lyme patients, clients that I was working with over the next several years. So, but I will say the biggest piece, if I had to pick one thing that was the most essential piece to recovery of Lyme, it's actually finding foods that cause inflammation in your gut. Leaky gut is a cause of many chronic diseases, and food intolerances are one of the main factors that contribute to leaky gut. And I saw this, it wasn't just in myself. Once I started sleuthing through my diet, I had a dozen more cases where I'm like, oh, we got to get you on a whole foods diet. We got to correct some nutritional deficiencies, and we got to remove these like inflammatory causing foods. Let's find them. And very often it was things like, gluten or dairy or soy or something like that. So anyway, that's a little nutshell version of how my practice developed through my chronic illness. And at the time I thought it was the worst, most devastating thing in the world. It just ruined my whole life. And it became this gift.
Yeah.
It ended up, recovery meant, oh, now I can help others. And I know what it's like to go through a debilitating disease and come out the other side. And I could actually hold people's hand and say, I know you'll get through this too.
Been there, done that.
Yeah. So that's what spawned my practice. And then I will say it was maybe 6 months after I had started really developing my practice and I'd completely recovered from my own illness that I was getting messages. I think this is all about listening to your calling, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was getting messages to start a school. And I had never thought in my life I was ever going to start a school. That was not on my agenda. But I was getting these letters in the mail from the American Herbalist Guild saying, oh, here's some things to help you start your school. And I'm like, right. And I'm getting someone else was saying, I was talking to Paul Bergner. He's like, yeah, would you like to use my curriculum if you start your school? Like, okay. Mm-hmm. And then the next thing I know, someone's offering me money and says, well, here's $20,000 to start your school.
Wow.
I had no choice at that point. I'm like, okay, I guess I'm starting a school. So yeah, I guess that's kind of a little bit of a background of how I got to become here at this time with ACORN.
Well, thanks for sharing. And that's actually a nice segue. I did want to talk to you about specifically what ACORN School of Herbal Medicine is all about. I've always been curious, is ACORN, because in all capital letters, is that an acronym?
Yeah, I put it in all caps so people would realize it's an acronym. And I think one day I'm going to change the school name to what the acronym means. But it stands for Academic Community of Radical Nature Cure. And
so cool.
I think that's the nature cure is the origins of Vitalist medicine, right? And it's not just Vitalist herbalism, it's Vitalist therapeutics. Yeah. Right. And then the idea that we have to be a little bit radical and break the mold in order to make the changes we want to see in the world.
Yeah.
So I had to add the radical in there. And also we're an academic community. We're hungry for knowledge, that we're engaged in this because we love it. It's not like I have to do this to get an A. It's like, no, I really love plants. I want to see people transform with this. This is cool, right? We're doing it because we love it and it's engaging and nourishing for us to study. So I came up with that acronym actually because I do live in an oak forest.
Right.
So
how do I make this work?
Originally starting out, I'm like, I don't want to name a school after a place. Places are man-made and named by humans, right? And they're like, what if I move, right?
Right, totally.
So I wanted it to be plant-focused, plant-oriented. And for me, the archetype of my where I live in my home are these beautiful oak trees that I live in.
I'd like to hear more about your relationship with Paul Bergner. He came to you and said, you're welcome to use my curriculum. Do you think that was that kind of like a passing of the torch thing? I mean, it sounds like he's definitely fond of you and your work, and just kind of curious how that all came about, and just how generally your school is structured as well.
So yeah, I will say Paul would not have just offered that to anybody. Paul and I have a special relationship. I mentioned he was my the clinical director when I was in school. So he was my primary teacher for clinical training. And then when I finished school, I did a private apprenticeship with him as well. I couldn't stop. Anytime I found a good teacher, I was like, can I be with you? Can I be with you? But Paul was really one of my primaries. And so when I finished school, I went over to his house and I said, I'll clean your apartment for you in exchange to hang out and ask you questions.
It's a good offer.
He said, okay. And through that time of just hanging out with him, I would come over once a week, every week, clean his apartment, hang out with him. Sometimes I'd come over twice a week, one time just to clean and one time just to hang out and talk about plants and healing and therapeutics and physiology, kinds of nerdy stuff. But we developed a closeness, right? Like there was a friendship that developed between our relationship. It became more than just a student-teacher relationship. And it also became a spiritual relationship. I remember one point I was visiting him at the school. He was just setting up NAIMH and it was a busy day. At the end of the day, he says, oh, by the way, come here. And he writes down on a piece of paper, he writes down just an address and a time. And he hands me a piece of paper. He says, be there. I mean, when your beloved teacher, who is this incredible mentor, tells you to show up at a certain place at a certain time, you do it. And I have no idea what to expect. And I get there, and it's a room full of dervishes. It's Sufi teachings. And I didn't know what a deep spiritual man Paul was until he invited me to the Sufi circle. And I'm sitting there in a room full of people with little white hats sitting on sheepskins. And the amount of love that poured to that room was so strong. I had never felt such a depth of love. And so I said, Paul, there is something amazing about this pact. And I started engaging with him. So he was an academic teacher to me, but he also became a spiritual mentor to me. And I think that really is one of the components of a vitalist practice, is that we need to be lit up in every aspect of our being, not just like, is our mitochondria functioning right, or is your digestion properly functioning? But we want to be engaged with life in all the ways that nourish our being, that make us feel enriched and make us feel like we're connected to something that's bigger than us. So anyway, so it was through this long connection. Paul and I were then, friends on many levels for, at least a decade. He was sort of in the background witness to my Lyme disease, and I was always messaging him when I had some questions I wasn't sure about. But we maintained this friendship even when I'd left Boulder at this point. I came back to Nevada City. And then it was, once I was recovered and I was sort of like getting these messages about school. I think I'm being called to do this, right? Like against my will, but okay, I'll do it. And that's when Paul says, if you're thinking of starting a school, you could try using my curriculum as a foundation. And I'm like, yes, please.
Heck yeah.
Heck yeah. He started me off. He just gave me access to his foundations curriculum, which is like 3 different courses. But what we started doing was taking it and putting it in a flipped classroom model, which it's a model of learning it's being used now in a lot of universities and other institutions. But it's a model of where you do like audio recorded or video recorded lecture at home. So you're doing lecture at home rather than in a classroom setting. And this is so smart because like when you're sitting in a classroom, how much of the information do you really retain? Right? Like you hear someone speaking, it comes in, it kind of mingles, and then like somewhere around 80% of it leaves the other ear, and you're lucky if you've held on to maybe 15% of what was happening in that class. So what we have are Paul's audio recorded lectures that students listen to for homework. And that means they can do it in their jammies, in their bed, when they're hanging out, they're relaxed. They're not trying to write down every word. They can rewind it, they can replay it, they have it for real life, so they can review it at any point they want. So what's so cool about that is that everyone's sort of got the lecture part at home on their own time. And then when they come to the class time, we get to do projects together. Let's do the homework portion together in class. Like, let's do these assignments, right? Like, let's sample and journal the herbs together. Let's really examine the materia medica together. Let's look at some case examples of where this applies in real life. So the class time becomes more interactive and it's more community learning based. So everyone has a chance to share and learn from each other. And this becomes really critical when you're sampling herbs, because in a community setting, you can see 20 people and maybe only a third of them have the response that was written in the book. Like, oh yeah, I taste what the book said. But then you experience people who are like, oh no, skullcap made me more agitated. Really? Like, you would never see that if you're just reading a book or following a lecture, but in the community learning element, you see that all the time. And you get to see where can I change this? What's going on with that person that they would have this reaction? Is it a constitutional indicator? Like, oh, you're really dry. Maybe we just need to moisten you, and that's all you need to feel less agitated. So we really look at the energetics and constitutional factors in that setting when we're doing the community learning sampling of herbs. So that's sort of how the curriculum is developed. That's what we do at ACORN. We use Paul's lectures as foundation. We flip it, and we have a community learning environment. So we
it
all
seems so obvious to do it that way. I love that.
I know, right? It's really brilliant. Yeah.
I guess also when you're in person with the rest of the students, you're also probably going on field trips. So I have to imagine learning how to wild harvest or hanging out in the garden too.
All of that. So right now, since the pandemic, I have moved my classes online. So I do have herb walks separately now. So I used to do them all together. So back when I did all in person, I was adamant that there's no way you can be an herbalist unless you're engaged in nature. There's no way you can just be a clinical herb. Even if you want to be the best medical herbalist in the world, you cannot do it effectively just learning out of a textbook. You have to get out in the plants, in nature, looking at their habitat, looking at their environment, seeing who they are as beings. So yeah, I was adamant I would take students out. It was at least once a week. Every week, I have a 3-day-a-week schedule. And one of those days was always outdoors, meet in the field. Let's do plant walks. Let's talk about plant ID, ethical harvesting, and how to take this plant out of the ground and turn it into medicine all the way up to serving your communities with it. So since I've been online, which I'm having a hard time getting off, it's like my long-term goal is I really need to detach from the Zoom world. It's driving me nuts.
Yeah, here we are.
I have a plan in action for that to happen one day. But once I went online, it was hard to stop because I now have this global audience.
Totally.
Students all over the world. It's hard to let that go. So I'm trying to find a way to get the support I need to keep that going and then give myself some time back to going back into person. So in the meantime, the way I'm handling that is I just do a once a month field class day, and I just have it open to whoever's in the community. So if it's a local student or just open to the public, anyone can come in and join in on my plant walks. They're some of my favorite.
Sweet. Well, before I forget, let's drop the website, acornschoolofherbalmedicine.com. Did I get that right?
Well, we shorten it for the web address. It's acornherbschool.com.
Very good. acornherbschool.com. Is that where you can also learn about, say, your consultations, if you're still doing those?
Yeah, so I right now I'm supervising the free clinic, and I run 3 programs, and I am very limited in how many private clients I can take. So I tend to have summers off. So I'll take private clients over the summer. But during the school year, I am so busy managing 40 different students across 3 different programs that I just don't. So what I do have, if you go to the website, you can see a link to our free clinic. And what that is people can sign up and they'll work with one of our clinicians, meaning they've already gone through advanced level first year training and then pre-clinical training in our advanced program. So they have an incredible background with Vitalist therapeutics, herbal medicine, Paul Bergner run curriculum with my 20 years of applying this shit in the real world and seeing how it works. And I can give you this is where the rubber meets the road. So they get all that training. So when you sign up for Free Clinic, you're paired with one of those clinicians. They do the interview, they see you privately, and then they have to write up the case and present it. So I read every case report. I give my feedback on every case report. So someone who's coming to the Free Clinic, they get the benefit of not just working with one student clinician, they're actually working with everyone in our clinic student body, including myself and Paul Bergner. We all collectively read those cases and give our feedback. So I don't think you can get better quality healthcare.
Pretty well-rounded.
Than having, a dozen people look at the same case and collaborate on it. So that's where people can sign up for working with me. You'd be doing it through one of my students.
Yeah, and when we visited Paul in Portland, it's probably a couple years ago now. I remember he was just so in love with this idea of going over case notes. Like it brings such a spark to his eye. He just loves it so much. I have to imagine you also like going over these case notes as well, just as much.
It's one of the joys of my life. I hate to say I'm not much of a nerd, but reading case studies, it's like you get to, it's not just reading an intake. What you want to see is the progression of the case over time. That's where it becomes juicy. It's like the intake is like, okay, they've got these conditions and this is the medicines they're taking and this is their like, okay, there's nothing exciting there. But what we'd see is someone coming in with an Hashimoto's or rheumatoid arthritis or a degenerative connective tissue disease, which are, chronic autoimmune illnesses. And you start to witness in the case reports the transformation that happens after 3 months or 4 months. And usually we do follow-ups about every 2 weeks. So you're getting many sessions. Sometimes you have 12 sessions before you finally see they no longer have this disease anymore, right? But we see it repeatedly. So the Vitalist therapeutics are the key. I guess I should just mention one more thing there, that I am a school of herbal medicine because I think the plants lead the way. But ultimately, it's the lifestyle factors and the nutrition that do the most healing, right? They're the correctors of life, right? So we do a lot of coaching and like diet and lifestyle and getting people engaged with nature as a method of healing. But we use the herbs as just like supporting allies and agents, right? Like, well, let's get you to let's work on your digestion and let's get you sleeping better at night. Let's use herbs for pain to manage that so you can get out and move around more, right? And the goal is not just to give the herb. The goal is to give the herb to support them to make the changes so they can take mastery of their own life, and then illness gets completely transformed before your eyes.
I love that. Did you want to share any particular story about a time where you and your crew did help someone out? Obviously, we don't have to say names or anything like that, but through diet, lifestyle, herbs, etc., you help someone, come through a chronic illness.
Gosh, I have a stack of cases. I don't think we have time to go through all of them, but I'll pull out one particular case. So there's several cases. One case I'll share, which is pretty remarkable. A woman with rheumatoid arthritis. She was on steroids. Right? So this is an autoimmune condition. And she came to us, she came to the Free Clinic, and her goal was to get off of steroids. And, very commonly in their mind, they're thinking, what herb can I take to replace the steroids? Which there are some herbs that can support that, but we had to look at what's the root cause, like where's the autoimmunity coming from? Right? And we all know in our training here in the Vitalist therapeutics that you've got to correct the gut. It all comes down to digestion and digestive function. And inflammation in the digestive tract will manifest as autoimmune conditions in the joints. So we started working with her on increasing some nutritional factors. The big one there is for inflammatory conditions, especially joint pain related ones, fish oils. So getting her high dose omega-3 essential fatty acids. That was our first intervention. The second intervention I think was the most critical was introducing a high protein breakfast. And I know that seems like a really silly, how is that related? But the high protein breakfast is one of the key interventions for almost any chronic disease because it sets the tone of the whole day. You have more energy. If you have like a high carb, starchy bagel for breakfast, you get this spike of energy and this crash, and it actually increases inflammation in the tissues. Whereas if you have that high protein breakfast, high protein, the amino acids are one of the things that regulate inflammation in the body. It keeps the energy stable, so you don't get those spikes in mood and energy throughout the day. So people go, oh, I actually now have the energy to like go on my daily walk.
Yeah.
And we see dozens of cases where all we did was add the high protein breakfast and it cured insomnia. And you wouldn't think that those are directly connected. But again, it's sort of working with the circadian rhythm that you want the fuel in the car, fuel in before you drive the car, and not have your biggest meal of the day right before you go to bed, and your body can't break it down when you're horizontal. And you want your metabolic heat will prevent you from actually sleeping well. So put that metabolic heat at the beginning of the day. It gives you sustained energy and then better sleep at night, and it's sort of working in the natural circadian rhythm. So this woman with rheumatoid arthritis, we intervened, high protein breakfast, fish oils. I think we gave her a couple other key nutrients like vitamin D to regulate inflammation, and of course magnesium for 1,000,010 reasons, because it helps with the pain threshold as well. And then the last piece, once we built her up and nourished her, we said, okay, what food would you like to explore as elimination diet for screening her food intolerance? And she decided to remove gluten. And it was literally within 3 weeks of being off gluten, after all the building and nourishing and preparing for her for that she was now able to taper her dose on her steroids. And so once she was like, oh, the inflammation started to go way down. Once the gluten was off, like she was starting to get pain free, and she's like, okay, now we can taper steroids. So she was really great. She worked with her doctor and got 1 milligram dosages rather than like a 5 milligram pill. So she could start doing, taking off 1 milligram a week kind of thing, just lowering it slowly. And as she started tapering off the steroids, we gave her a nice anti-inflammatory formula. We usually do honey pastes as our method of delivery because they're much easier for people to take. You don't have to worry about the harsh alcohol. It corrects for moisture. It's delicious. People eat the whole jar, so it actually works. So we gave her a honey paste that had like, frankincense and turmeric and licorice and some ginger, something like that. Something like that as an anti-inflammatory formula.
Oh.
So she started taking that to replace her steroids, and she was titrating between the two. She completely got off her steroids, and get this, she went back to her doctor to get lab work. She had 0 markers of autoimmunity. Like no longer has any. It was the CRP is what they measure is the C-reactive protein. Completely normal, no autoimmune markers. So we consider that a great example of Vitalist therapeutics curing chronic disease.
And you just see this time after time after time, over and over again in the clinic.
It's the thrilling part of my life is watching people transform. Yes, I'm in love with plants. I could spend all day just talking about plants, but for me, the real juice is, we can transform lives with this.
Yeah.
We can actually do something with this that's meaningful for the world, not just my self-serving love of plants. So it's true. We have maybe 300 case studies now. The number grows every year, all documented. And I do have cases of Hashimoto's, connective tissue disorders. Last fall, we had a case of chronic kidney disease. Her markers were back to normal and she got off meds. And that's a very serious condition to work with. I do get to see it a lot.
Heather, I would love to have you back on the show at some point and go over some more of these because it's so fascinating. And I know I've mentioned this to you before, but when I take a class with Paul Bergner, he'll go into these complex teachings about phytochemistry and anatomy and physiology and nutrition, and then it always comes back to the basic pillars of Vitalist therapeutics: sleep, movement, nutrition. And I just want to hear you go on and on about this because there's probably so many really fascinating examples about this. And let's do a round 2 at some point. We're not ending the show quite yet, but I just want to say I would love to have you back on and go over some more of these bullet points and examples. But
absolutely. Absolutely.
I did want to shout out. Looks like Lydia's joining us from the Herb Rally Schoolhouse. Thanks so much for joining us live, Lydia. If you have any questions, like last minute questions for Heather, feel free to leave them in the chat. Otherwise, this is going to be a selfish question. I really like the whole concept of self-care. I've really gone deep with it this past year or so, and lo and behold, I feel much more nourished and healthy and happy and fulfilled. And I make it a major priority of mine to practice a lot of different types of self-care practices each and every day, to the point where it almost seems kind of counterintuitive, because maybe I'm stressing myself out with how much self-care I'm doing. But no, I think overall it's a really good thing. And I'm just kind of curious, are there any, say, lesser known Vitalist, with a Vitalist bent self-care practices that you might recommend to me and perhaps the audience?
I would say the lesser known ones are daily walking, movement, at whatever level your body feels good. Some people are really like, I'm a runner, and some people are like, I can barely stretch on my living room floor. So at whatever level you feel able, but I'll tell you the secret Vitalist therapeutics is get your movement. And I recommend daily walking, some degree of that. Get it at the noon hour or some point during that window when the sun is high in the sky. And there is a real reason that I'm recommending this, because when you get outside, when the sun is high in the sky, you get the optimal hit of serotonin. Sunlight through the eyes stimulates serotonin during the day. And this does two things. One, this is powerful mood booster, right? We know serotonin and its effects for enhancing mood, treatment of depression, and also exercise is the most antidepressant substance there is, right? And I'm not talking rigorous, just a nice brisk walk in your favorite park or forest or garden, right? And that's one of the ways we can engage with nature. The other thing about that's so cool is the hit of serotonin that you get during the day will become a rebound level effect of melatonin at night. People are often trying to find sleep remedies, and I'm telling you, if you can make the serotonin during the day and then at night, dim the lights, cool the temperature, like let the outside air in, let your house get cool at night, and don't have bright lights, because you need the light to stimulate serotonin. When dark comes, it's the lack of light that triggers that serotonin conversion into melatonin. So two things: you get optimized mood, optimized immunity from the daytime outdoors, and then you get optimized sleep from that as a rebound effect at night. So I will say that is a powerful Vitalist therapeutic trick. It seems really silly, but it's one of the first elements of vitalism and nature cure that was employed way back. We're talking, 1800s. These were the physician level doctors of Europe in the nature cure movement. They all rigorously daily walking. And Father Knipe would have his patients out walking in the morning dew, barefoot in the morning dew, because the cold dew causes cold stimulation. It was a form of hydrotherapy.
That's cool.
The cold stimulation on the feet and the movement. And really a reminder here that it's not the herbs that do the healing. It's not the healer that does the healing. It's the life force that does the healing. And so you being interested in self-care, looking for ways just to increase vital force, whether that's a cold plunge, a brisk walk during the day, right? But getting that hit of serotonin and sunlight, that's a tradition that is as ancient as eating whole foods.
I love it. And I'm an extremely avid walker. Back when I was counting my steps, I was getting probably anywhere from 10 to 20,000 steps per day. My wife thinks I'm insane, but I like the noon tip though. That's really neat. I'm definitely going to start implementing that more.
So the other tip on that is getting your metabolism up late at night. If you do walking like after 4 p.m. and people who do like 24-hour gyms, or you've been at work all day and then you go do your rigorous exercise, you'll have a harder time sleeping, because you're getting up metabolic heat, and sleep Sleep needs cool, still, moist, right? All those yin elements help promote sleep. So this is why I recommend activity, movement during the daylight, midday hours, morning hours or midday hours. But I always recommend cool off. Don't do those major activities after like 4 or 5 or a couple hours before dinner. And if you ever notice, like you'll go to a dance party or something and everyone's out late dancing till like, 11 o'clock at night, and then you can't sleep after that. You come home and you're still buzzing and wired. It's because you've generated all that metabolic heat. So you need to cool off at nighttime, but get your metabolic heat during the day. That's traditional Vitalist tip.
That's a good tip. Yeah, I have maybe it's a bad habit. I go on walks almost every night. I find it to be very enjoyable at that time of day, but yeah, maybe I got to reconsider that.
Restructure your day, or just gentle, slow, short walks, like a gentle stroll for a sunset view. Great. But if you're really trying to like walk to get your exercise, do that earlier. Yeah.
Great. I love it. This has been great, Heather. Thank you so much for joining us on the Herbalist Hour. Any closing thoughts, any projects you'd like to plug before we wrap up and get out of here? Again, that's acornherbschool.com.
I'll say people can sign up for my newsletter. That's the best way to follow me. I'm always doing events. I have local herb walks. I'm out traveling, doing retreats sometimes. So you can always follow me if you sign up for the newsletter. You can go to acornherbschool.com webpage, homepage, and at the bottom, there's a place to sign up for the newsletter. As far as closing words, I will just say, sample your herbs. Put them in your body. And there's something, the most important thing is to sample them in a community, right? Get your friends together. Maybe instead of passing around the joint, pass around some lemon balm, right? Pass around and everybody sample it. And can you taste the energetics? Is it hot? Is it cold? Is it moist? Is it dry? Where does it hit me in my body? Really evaluate through sampling. My final word to anyone who wants to learn herbs: don't trust everything the book says. Trust experience. And that's going to teach you a whole lot more.
Beautiful. What a great way to wrap up the show. Thanks again to Lydia for joining us live, Herb Rally Schoolhouse member. Thanks, Heather, for joining us on the Herbalist Hour. We'll see you in the next episode. Take care, everybody. Thanks so much for watching today's episode of the Herbalist Hour. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up. And if you want more great herbal content, be sure to subscribe to our Herb Rally YouTube channel. If you enjoy these Herbalist Hour episodes and you'd like to join us live, you can do so by becoming an Herb Rally Schoolhouse member. Learn more at herbrally.com/schoolhouse. And if you want to get your first 30 days for free, use coupon code YouTube30 at checkout. So our Herb Rally Schoolhouse members get access to exclusive video classes, monographs, and a lot more herbal community discounts, along with joining these live Herbalist Hour interviews. So one more time, herbrally.com/schoolhouse. Enter coupon code YouTube30 at checkout to get your first 30 days for free. All right, we'll see you in the next episode, and take care.